Pleased to be joined by the aforementioned guru of all things sport, college football. Of course, you know him as 24/7 national recruiting editor, Brandon Huffman. I know him as a great friend and somebody I've known for almost 20 years now, and an annual visitor on this show. It has a bunch of different forms. This is your first time at Y Option, man. Really excited to have you. First and foremost, how are you doing? What is life like? And where are you coming to us from today?
Yeah, so I'm in Nashville right now. We just wrapped up our Transfer Portal Palooza show on Monday, which came 5 days after we shot our signing day show from Fort Lauderdale. So this is my last trip of 2024. But hey, the good news is I went over 100,000 miles without leaving the country, and it's the little things that add up, and I don't mind it because it's fun to talk football. And what a crazy week from last Wednesday to the portal and then the championship game and the playoffs in between. I mean, this is a wild ride that we were so used to being in early February.
It is a wild ride, and I love that you're coming to us from like the corner office of Adam Stanko, so make sure you tell him hello. Steal one of those mints that he has on his desk as well, man, on your way out. But to that point, can you, because I think signing day has come and gone, and obviously there's no national letters of intent anymore. It's financial aid agreements. The landscape has shifted. There's financial agreements that are now coming from schools differently than collectives. Can you just give like the high level bullet points of where the world stands as we talk on a Tuesday, as the portal just opened up officially and signing day, to your point, was less than a week away?
Yeah, take everything you ever knew about the transfer portal, about signing day, about what they signed and when they signed it, and just throw it out the window, because this is, with conference realignment really going into effect in 2024, the expansion of the playoff, it's fitting that you had the calendar change up in December from the early signing period going from the third Wednesday of the month to the first Wednesday of the month, and then the portal opening after this signing period went through, coming on the heels of the conference championship games, which that had been the case the last couple of years. It had gone on the Monday, but now you got 12 teams rather than 4. So maybe we saw a lot of guys go in the portal, but maybe we didn't see as many impact guys go in the portal because they're still in the playoffs. But everything has changed. And I always say that, this is my 22nd recruiting class that I've covered. It changes every 3 or 4 years, but really since July 1st, 2021, college football has changed. And that was, of course, when NIL went into effect. That was the fall that the transfer portal went from you had to get in and then get a waiver to play immediately to then being able to play whenever you want to then you had unlimited transfers. That's where we're at in December of 2024. If you had been living in a cave for the last 4 years or 5 years, let's say before COVID, and you're coming into college football now, you would not recognize it.
Yeah, you wouldn't recognize it. So when you look at, what you do, which is now has only grown, right? Like you're so dialed on the high school prospects that are being recruited. Now you are ultimately as dialed into the portal guys that are transferring. Where have you seen colleges net out in the last week in terms of strategy, high school building foundation? I think we would all agree that like the tighter culture you have, the better chance you have to win. But there's people like Dan Lanning, Kenny Dillingham that clearly are able to morph new faces into a culture and find themselves in the playoffs. I'm kind of curious when you look at the bigger programs, and we're always coming from the lens of college football through the lens of the West Coast, how teams have approached high school and portal regarding roster management.
That's the same West Coast that provided 3 of the 4 playoff buys.
I heard about that. Yeah.
It just means way more out West if we're just looking at who gets to sit out that first round. I think schools are doing a much better job playing defense in keeping their rosters together on one hand. The other caveat that we forgot to mention was 2025-2026 season is when the rosters go to 105. So you're seeing a lot of guys going into the portal these last couple of days that had been on campus maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years, that hadn't played significantly. They're not going into the portal necessarily because they want to. In a lot of cases, those tough conversations were had over the weekend. And if you were, an Arizona State, a Boise State, an Oregon, a UNLV that was playing in a conference championship on Friday and Saturday, you didn't have those conversations until Sunday because you had games to play. You wanted those guys to at least be locked in. But now you're seeing more guys going to the portal. So you're seeing schools play better defense in terms of keeping the guys that they really want, that they think are going to be the impact players. On the flip side, you're also seeing schools playing offense too. We're saying, hey, you know what? Here's the reality of the situation. You've been here 3 years. You haven't cracked the 3D. We need immediate impact help. We are probably going to get that out of the portal. So that's why you're seeing a larger amount of guys going to the portal on Monday, because they've essentially been told you need to start looking elsewhere. But you didn't see as high profile of names go in the portal because schools are doing a better job and understanding that revenue sharing, if it's passed by the House, will come into play in the fall. So schools are doing a better job of keeping their big name guys. Remember a year ago, you had Kyle McCord going to the portal like the morning of, 10 days after he took Ohio State on the brink of beating Michigan and going to the playoffs, or at least the Big Ten championship game. You didn't have those big time names like you did a year ago happen on Monday. And that's because schools are now, saying, hey, we want to keep these guys. And you got 12 teams that are in the playoff. You might see bigger names go in after the first round of the playoff games are done and 4 schools their season comes to an end. You might see another round within the 4 days after the quarterfinals. But for right now, it just seems like a lot of names that are, I hate to say this because these are kids that they were trying to fulfill a dream playing college football. But schools, in a sense, and this exact phrase was said to me by a general manager, we're cutting the dead weight.
Okay. All right. So a lot to follow up on. Let's just stay on the portal. We'll get back to the high school kids in a minute. I'm also seeing starters leaving, entering the portal, right? I saw a tackle at USC who's been a multi-year starter enter the portal. And I'm wondering how GMs are approaching the roster management and the financial side of it. Like, do you see places slotting a certain amount of money? Let's just be a for instance here. Let's just say I want to pay a right tackle $750,000, and that's what we have budgeted here. But school from another part of the country says, well, we'll pay you 1.2. Like, are you saying that's why starters are leaving? Is it purely financial? Because that's what's surprising to me is watching, like, call it an above average player, like a starter at a Power 4 big time school, multi-year starter, saying, hey, I killed it. Malik Murphy, I've thrived at my institution, but now I'm going to go. And that is the part to me that I want clarity on before I offer a jaded opinion on. Maybe is probably the most appropriate way to say that.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, Malik Murphy's a perfect example because you have Malik Murphy and you have Cam Ward in 2 very similar situations where they both went to ACC schools coming into the season. Cam Ward had been a starter for 2 years at Washington State, whereas Malik Murphy was the backup to Quinn. You have Arch nipping at your heels. When Malik left a year ago, it was to just get tape. It was to just get film in live reps. A year later, now he's leaving because he's got that tape. He's got that film. He was just at Texas. I mean, everything's bigger in Texas, right? Nothing against Duke. Manny Diaz did a phenomenal job this year, took him to a bowl game. But we watch Duke football to kill time until Duke basketball starts, right? That's what Duke fans have said for years when they were a miserable football program. So Malik Murphy, in that mind, he got the tape. Now there's going to be a major Power 5 school that's probably a quarterback away from being a playoff contender. They just need a quarterback who's got experience. And one thing that we was seeing with the portal this year is schools were valuing productivity over projection. They wanted guys who actually had film that had been productive at their, again, a lot of guys went to the portal yesterday without film, but the names that went in are guys that were starters at their school. A lot of the bigger names, I should say, that have the film now to make them attracted to schools. So in the case of Malik Murphy, it may not be financially motivated, but it's Malik Murphy motivated. Now I have the chance to do this. On the flip side, look back to Oklahoma a year ago. Dylan Gabriel had been the starter for 2 years. He had done a fantastic job at Oklahoma. Jeff Lebby leaves. They want to go with the youth movement. They go to Jackson Arnold, and 2 programs end up being directly impacted by Dylan Gabriel leaving, even though he was essentially encouraged to leave. Oklahoma has a 6-6 season, fire their offensive coordinator in the middle of the year. Dylan Gabriel is the number 1 team in the country's quarterback and a Heisman finalist. If Dylan Gabriel is told, hey, you know what, you're going to be the guy again, even though you've been the starter the last 2, we're going to give you your number 3. What does Oregon do? What does Oklahoma's season look like? So in a lot of cases, it is financially motivated. A lot of cases, it's, I guess the best way of saying that there's no real one specific answer. There's 3 or 4 different sizes that fit all rather than one. That said, when it is a starter at a major program, usually, if it's a blue blood, it's, hey, you've been good, you've been fine, you've been starting, but you weren't good enough. We're going to replace you.
Got
And
it.
so I
So
think, in some cases, that's what's being told.
yeah, that's the part that I think is perplexing to some fans, and even me as an analyst. I'm looking at like, hey, you've been a highly productive player, you've been a
Mhm.
multi-year starter. Well, why are you leaving? And it's either because you don't have enough money, or you're not willing to pay what somebody else is willing to pay. And then I wonder for the athlete, is it financially driven? Do they like when you talk to players, like where does like the degree fit in? Like they're probably close to that. Where does like an alumni base fit in? Or should we all just kind of, I think we all love the pageantry of college football from what we see on game day, but should we kind of be transitioning out of that of, hey, like at the end of every year, players that have produced, to your point, are always going to look, and we should just get accustomed to that. And you're probably not going to have the budget, whether it's revenue sharing budget, your collective budget, whatever the budget is, you're probably not going to have the budget to pay everybody, because somebody's always going to be able to pay your tackle a little bit more because you're paying your quarterback a little more. And you start looking at it like that. Is that kind of the way that you're seeing GMs even approach this
100%.
situation?
No, I think you hit on the head there, Yogi. I think that's going to be something that's going to have to be managed by these head coaches. It used to be that assistant coaches, position coaches, as you know, the DB coach would go recruit the DBs. The area recruiter would go recruit that area. The coaches have very little involvement in comparison to years past. It's now assistant recruiting directors, personnel directors, general managers. When it used to be the high school quarterback, his high school coach would be the one, or maybe his private coach would be the one talking to the offense coordinator at the school he's at. The communication is now between his people, and by people I mean his agent, his circle, his marketing director, talking to the head of the collective, talking to the general manager. There's very little communication between the head coach, the OC, and the quarterback anymore on the front end. It's now business driven, and more power to them. They've earned that opportunity to do so. It's why people say, oh, there's no tampering going on. Well, yeah, by letter of the law, it might not be the head coach at State U calling the kid and saying, hey, we want you here when you transfer, but it might be the head of the collective, who's not an employee of the university athletic department, reaching out to the players, high school coach or his marketing team or his agent, saying, hey, if this opportunity arises in 3 months, is he interested, and what's the price tag to do so? All right, so that's where the communication is now happening. And you see this a lot, and this as having been a part of, quite possibly the greatest recruiting head coach the West Coast has ever seen. And those kids would always just rave about when Pete Carroll came in for the in-home visit. What we haven't seen much in the last couple of weeks, Yogi, is those pictures at Christmas time, right next to the Christmas tree, of the head coach and the offensive coordinator and a kid at the in-home visit, because we're well past that stage. It's business people. It's the classic Southern California, have your people call my people. That's how it's evolving. So the relationship is transactional in so many ways now. And so it's not the coach developing the player or the player going to that school because he wants the coach to develop him. It's now driven by the market. And so as a result of that, you're seeing the portal being impacted, and you're seeing the numbers. Really, at the end of the day, these coaches are now going to have to massage and say, hey, yeah, our quarterback's making more money than our left tackle. So if our left tackle leaves because he feels disrespected by our quarterback, which is no different than the NFL, where the quarterback's the highest paid player, we have to understand that we got to have a backup plan in place, because it now becomes a measure of respect. And the people that are in that kid's ear are probably telling them it's disrespectful that quarterback who you keep protected for 12 games is getting paid more than you. That fogs the brain up. And now the kids go, well, yeah, I got to get out of here.
Yeah. Which ideology do you subscribe to more? Build my roster with as much talent as possible, even if that's, let's just take the quarterback room. You're going to have 5 guys in the same room, players in the same class, or class after class after class. Or, hey, let's have 3 in the room. Like David Shaw used to always tell me that, like have enough room for everybody to breathe so they feel like they have an opportunity. Or third option, let's just go get a guy every year.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just go get a guy because we know that, to your point, they're already proven on tape.
Yeah, I mean that's really changed, right? Where you would take a quarterback where you're like, hey, we're not going to get an elite quarterback because we just got Andrew Luck this year, so we just need to go get a guy who wants to value the Stanford degree and wants a great experience, and he may play his junior or senior year. I think back to one of the recruitments that I refer to this one all the time. When Rashawn Evans came out in 2014, UCLA was one of his finalists. They said, you're going to be the starter. Anthony Barr graduated. Auburn, where his dad played, said, you're going to be the starter. Nick Saban says, yeah, you might start your senior year, but we got 5 guys just like you that you're going to have to play behind. So we'll see you in 3 years. And he chose to go to Alabama, started like 1 game his junior year, started his whole senior year, was a top 10 pick. Those days are done. These kids aren't waiting 3 years to play. So you would like to go get a guy, but you also have to understand that with the shift to an NFL style model, the days of having 5 quarterbacks in your room are probably dwindling to, if you have 3, you're probably going to be fine, because with revenue sharing now, the third string quarterback's going to think, I need to be getting a pretty good piece of the pie because I could be starting somewhere else, but I'm here to provide depth and be developed.
Okay, so let's break down revenue sharing so people have a clear understanding of what it is. My understanding is that everybody's going to have the same set of money, whether it's 18 or $20 million, to divide as they choose appropriate within their roster. Is that accurate? That's fundamentally what. So most people think that that's going to quiet the crazy tide right now, because everybody's going to have the same amount of money. What's your thought on that, and what's reality around that?
I think the reality is you're still going to see the rich get richer, because the collectives are still going to be involved. They're still going to be able to offer NIL deals. They're still going to be able to offer sponsorships at the local car dealership or at the local, restaurant. The difference is that the donor fatigue, where you're asking a school to say, hey, we just gave this head coach an $80 million extension. Now we want to fire him. Can we get $72 million from you guys to pay his buyout? Oh, by the way, can you also chip into the collective so we can get a left tackle and a pass rusher and a receiver and a quarterback? Now the schools will be like, you know what? You're on your own. You're the one that signed into that contract. Go pay that buyout with your rich TV contract. All right. We want a quarterback. We want to win. If that coach, you signed him, but we will go do what we can to get you the pass rusher you need, the tackle. So there's still going to be NIL as a result of it. But schools are going to have to dictate. Let's say, I think Martin Jarman said that the school is going to use between $21 to $25 million across the athletic department. Let's be honest. The majority of that's going to go to football and men's basketball and probably women's basketball. And let's be honest, the majority of that's going to go to football because that's your biggest roster. That's where your biggest moneymaker is going to be. You are now going to have to essentially find a capologist, if you will, from the collegiate ranks. And then that's going to be known throughout the rest of the locker. Now, the reality is I have a college-age son. I had a college-age daughter. I know that, they like to exaggerate their things. So I'm sure guys are going to be bragging about how much more they're getting than they really are. But all that's going to do is cause even more conflict. Well, he said he's getting $3 million. Why am I only getting $250? And you're going to have to go back. So now you're going to have to say, with our $20 million that we have, let's say 18 of it's going to football, we got to figure out a way to get 85 guys fed. And with the rosters increasing 105 scholarship guys, the SEC said, we're still only going with 85 scholarships. There's going to be 20 walk-ons, because any walk-on you bring in, he's not going to have to be held to the revenue sharing. But you still got to pay those 85, and you got to distribute it how you see best, and understand that the punter and the long snapper aren't going to make what the quarterback is, but you've got to manage that locker room to not say, we've got all this money going into this one guy, and it's our quarterback, and he's thrown 11 interceptions and only thrown 7 touchdowns, while my middle linebacker's out there, getting 19 tackles and 4 tackles for loss, and he's making a quarter of that. That's how you've got to now manage the egos in that locker room. And that's why you're seeing more teams go to this NFL model of a general manager and personnel and scouting assistants, and essentially bringing in. And it's why Stanford was so innovative with Andrew Luck. It's not just a general manager to, let's make sure that we've got portal. It's, hey, Troy Taylor, your DB coach isn't doing well. Your running backs coach isn't doing well. By the way, this is how much we have. We're spending too much here and there. You're going to see more oversight just like that.
Wow. Amazing. The GM role. As I've talked to other people in the industry, they're like, this is a real thing. And I've talked to ADs, Absolutely. This is a real thing. What is, I promise we'll get to high school players in a minute, the role of the GM in your eyes? Like, some, it could be an advanced recruiting coordinator. Some, it could be your leading negotiations. Some, to your point of Andrew Luck, it could be oversight of the program. What do you think is the best value if you had to define the job? Because there's a world where I'm like, I'm hiring Brandon Huffman to be my GM. He knows every player in the world. Why would I not get a guy who's that connected, a Brian Stump? Like, you start thinking about the people that I think could do this. But I'm curious for you, what would you paint as the job description for a really successful GM of a power program?
If everything that the description is sounding like for Andrew Luck, I think that is where we're going to go. And I think it's brilliant. Where Stanford has taken their share of a beating for not being modern and not doing transfer portal as heavy as other schools, not playing the NIL game. But they've got kind of the innovative mindset of let's have a guy who's going to be in charge of coaching management. I think that's ideal. But the reality is, this is no longer about evaluations. It's not about, finding the best fit. It will be at Stanford. It will be at a Duke, at a Northwestern, where they're, hamstrung a little bit. It'll probably still be at Clemson because of Dabo's philosophy. But the reality is it's going to be business driven. It's going to be market driven. So you're going to need when you look at the NFL general managers, they have to be savvy businessmen. They are working with agents that are all, by the way, NFLPA certified, and guys that understand they can get their certification stripped away and they're no longer an agent. You also have to, find what your team needs are, get on the same page with your director of player personnel, with your head coach, and find out, will this guy come in as a free agent fit? Will the draft, this guy we want to draft, will he fit? In college, your general manager is essentially making and breaking business deals. He's brokering deals. Sure, he's managing the roster, but he's also now got to say, what's that guy's number? Okay, we're taking him off the board because that's ridiculous. He's not good enough to get that. Then he's going to have to deal with a lot of agents. And yes, you do have your Athletes First, and you do have your CAA and your William Morris's and Rosenhaus Sports agents that are NFLPA certified. We have a lot of guys that basically have an Instagram account and, can't even rent a car, but they're now representing a lot of these players. And now you've got a general manager in college who's dealing with an uncertified player agent who's getting 20% or so off the top. And so now it's a lot of ego massaging of the player you're trying to get to come there.
Yeah.
And
What do you think? What do you think about, like, because I hear like the player massaging. So let's just say I was an Elite 11 quarterback and I go, which is a premier quarterback camp, ran and contributed to the book, 5-Star QB. I'd advise every parent to read it. Ton of advice in that book. If you are an Elite 11 quarterback, so premier QB, you go to a place, let's just say you don't play for 2 years. You do not have that tape like Malik Murphy. What is your value in the portal? Like where, because I feel like that, like people often talk about like the JC player being left in limbo or the high school player. I think like the quarterback that doesn't play for 2 years is an interesting predicament because they want to go somewhere they're going to be guaranteed to be the starter. I don't know if Malik Murphy was guaranteed the job or not, but he was the guy. And then what are coaches talking to you about in that regard when it comes to those players that are highly regarded 2 years ago, but haven't been on the field over the last 2 seasons?
Yeah, I mean, unless your name is Arch Manning, right? You probably, after being the backup for 2 years, aren't going to have the leverage and pull that you think you are. Matthew Sluka had a lot of pull because he did well at Holy Cross. Curtis Rourke did well in the portal because he had a lot of success at Ohio. If you were a backup who's waited 2 or 3 years and you maybe saw some spot duty here in a blowout and you're just handing it off, what do you have to show for? And, oh, well, I had really good film in high school. Yeah, that was 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So that's why you see a lot of quarterbacks dipping out after maybe a year or two rather than sticking around to year 3 or 4. The idea of a quarterback sticking around, I mean, when you see starting quarterbacks being willing to leave, that should tell you that the backup quarterbacks are able to read the room pretty quickly. And that's, I mean, a perfect example is Utah. Okay, Utah has lost 4 quarterbacks in the last 96 hours. With the report that Cam Rising is looking to leave and play somewhere else for 2025, it kind of comes on the heels of Jason Beck being hired as the OC, Devin Dampier going into the portal, likely following him. But they got Luke Patari graduating, Sam Hugh goes in the portal, Isaac Wilson goes in the portal, Brandon Rose goes in the portal, Cam Rising is now likely going into the portal. So you lose 1 through 5 on your depth chart. You've got a perceived guy that you think is going to come in, but who's going to be the backup? If you're a portal guy, you now have no high school depth. And if you're a backup and you're transferring, are you going to go there knowing that, hey, this guy's OC is the new OC. He's going to be the starter. So if I'm transferring there, I'm going to be back. I should just stay here. So that's what makes it harder. And so, and it's a great question because on Friday I had a call from a quarterback who's at a Power 4 school who hasn't seen the field in 2 years, and he has not gone into the portal, but he's saying, hey, the coaches that recruited me at these other schools years ago, they're not there. Do you think that they may want me at this school? And there's a general panic now happening. I have nothing to show for it other than my high school film, which was 2021, 2022. And it's a what have you done for me lately business. So those backup quarterbacks are now finding I had all of the attention coming out of high school. Now I'm pleading, but the issue in a lot of these is in their mind, they're still a power four quarterback. Worst case, they're a G4 quarterback. Instead of just saying, you know what, I'll go to the FCS and play. I want to play. I want to get on the field. I want to get behind center and lead my team down the field. I should go look at a Big Sky school. I should go look at a Missouri Valley. In their mind, I could still play on that Saturday primetime game and at that level in front of 100,000, not in front of 5,000 in freezing cold blizzards.
Yeah, that's why, like, if I'm one of those quarterbacks, like, this new look Pac-12, I think should be a hub. Like, go to Washington State, go to Oregon State, go ball for 2 years or 1 year, whatever. And if you need to go achieve that dream, go achieve it. So here's my question for you on the high school kid. Give us a sense for the market, right? Let's just pretend I am a Elite 11 quarterback in high school, and I've got a chance to go to a power school. Okay, I want to know what that offer generally might look like at a big time school. And then give me, you referenced Dan Pierre, right? Like, what does an offer look like for somebody who's balled or played at a high level at a non-power four school who has that film? And I'd be so curious what those two things look like.
Well, I think a great example of that question is Cam Ward. You know, granted, Wazoo was in the Pac-12 a year ago, but he kind of set the market 3 years ago when he left Incarnate Word to go to Washington State with Eric Morris. Now, remember, there was a bunch of hubbub about how Wazoo was giving him, their collective was giving him a truck. All right. Think about how harmless that looks now compared to 3 years ago. It's like, oh, yeah, you only give him a truck. That's the only reason he came here was because of a truck. But now you have a year later. Okay. John Mateer has not gone into the portal yet, but Ben Arbuckle did. He's now the OC at Oklahoma. Cam Ward, who John Mateer backed up, is now thriving at Miami. So does Mateer, who with 1 year of film, now become a very heavily marketed quarterback? Yeah. Is he going to get what Cam Ward did? Maybe not, because there's the questions about how good of a passer is he when he's a real good dual threat. But if you're good enough, a school will overpay you because they think that that's just that one missing piece. High school quarterback. So I talked with an agent, and he said, you know, it's just like the NFL. The three most in-demand positions, really there's a fourth now because wide receivers, believe it or not, are now creeping back into that priority. But it goes quarterback, edge rusher, offensive tackle, wide receiver. If you're a running back or middle linebacker, there's not as much value in you. But if you're a quarterback, receiver, offensive tackle, edge rusher, there's going to be more value. There's a reason you're seeing a lot of guys make that jump from the FCS level or the G5 level, because they do have the film to prove it. If you're a receiver, you're going to be fast no matter what. If you're a fast receiver, you're fast in FCS, you're going to be fast in the FBS. So that's why you're seeing the productivity become more important than the projection. That's why schools are more willing to go take a group of five quarterback or an FCS offensive lineman, because he at least has flashed it on film rather than the kid that he's going off the sideways screen record video because he hasn't played. And so they're going to command more money. Now, if you're a high school kid, if you're a top tier kid, you're going to command more NIL collective. If you're a second tier kid, if you get an offer, your NIL is going to be your revenue sharing, and it's probably going to be minimal until you become the starter. And that's what I said. It's changed so much. And you're going to see better football being played in the Big Sky, which is already, in my opinion, the best FCS conference in the country. You're going to see better football in the G5. I mean, the Pac-12 is going to be fantastic with the Boise State and the San Diego State and the Fresno State, Colorado State, Utah State additions, in addition to Oregon State and Washington State, because those schools don't have the deep pockets that the Power 5 schools, but they're going to get really talented players who are basically not going to command the money at those Power 4 schools. So they're going to go there. The challenge will then be to pull what Boise State did with Ashton Genty and keep them there, because you may end up in a situation where you're Washington State and you lose the guy that you really developed for those 2 years in Cam Ward or in John Mateer. We saw it with Wayshawn Parker going into the portal. He goes to Wazoo. That was his only Power 4 offer at the time, or Power 5 offer. Goes to Washington State, rushes for 650, goes into the portal after 6 months on campus. Yeah. That's going to happen more often than not, and that's what those schools are going to have to prepare for.
Okay, so just real quick, if you can, high school elite quarterback, what's the market for them? Is it $1 million? Is it $500,000? And then to your point of the FCS or power, non-power four quarterback, is what their value now to elevate, do the Cam Ward in the modern era? What do you think that number is?
I think they're very similar numbers. And I think there's more confidence, though, in giving that to the FCS, the Cam Ward type, than the high school, because there still is. I mean, and you and I have talked about it. Your book was about it. There's been a number of guys that went on to be 5 stars that just didn't connect. Think about Boise State. Great example. Maddox Madsen is taking them to the playoffs in a first round bye. They had one of the biggest names in the portal a year ago, Malachi Nelson, go there. I guarantee you there was money invested in Malachi Nelson to come, whatever was left over to keep Ashton Genty there. But it's Maddox Madsen who's got them on the brink of, playing in the playoff semifinals. It has them in the playoffs. So there's still going to be some value to being a high-level high school quarterback if you go into the portal and you leave early enough. But there's going to be less money. It's only going to go to that elite. Those top 10, 15 quarterbacks, they're going to get paid. Okay. Yeah. 16 to 30 probably aren't going to do it unless they play. I've seen some of the numbers. I had an agent give me he had a quarterback, and there was 3 different offers from 3 different schools. And 2 of them were very front loaded. The third was, we're not going to front load this, but if you become the starter, this is what your value becomes. And it blew away those other 2 offers. So if you're smart and you play the long game, you might get that back end deal, but that would mean you have to wait 3 years to get that back end deal. Most guys are going to jump at the front end money. I mean, I get it. I understand. You're 17, 18. That money is life changing. You might not be the starter, but the second they drop you into the portal, your value has now dropped if you haven't seen the field. So you better have gotten that first year money, because that's not going to be as glamorous that second time. That's why you're seeing schools be more willing to go to the G5 and the FCS to find guys, because they're going to command higher value. But at least you're bringing them in, not needing them to sit behind for 3 years. You're bringing them in because that one guy is the missing piece. That's your Cam Ward. That's your Vernon Adams. Less likely to be a Dakota Prukop type. Dakota's taken a lot of strays the last couple of days, but that's the issue. For every Vernon Adams, they're going to have a Dakota Prukop who did not make that transition well from the FCS to the FBS. But,
okay, last college question for you, yeah. And then we will get to the high school guys before we cut you loose here. We're seeing a lot of guys say, I'm entering the portal, but I'm going to stay with my team through their playoff run. The academics just where does that land? Like, if you play January 20th, you're in a semester, whether that's a quarter semester, a true semester. Like, you're not enrolled at one school, or are you? Like, do you have any intel? Because in my mind, I still go to the point of, if you finish at a school, and this is my Jordan Addison example, wins a Blitnikoff at Pitt, leaves Pitt after spring ball, gets lit up by that place, my alma mater, comes to SC, has a heck of a 6-8 months, becomes a first round pick, but I don't know if he has an alumni base. The coaches will always love on him as long as they're there. But I wonder about that. And then I think of the degree and the power of the degree. Where does that even net out? And then do you have an answer on, can I be enrolled in 2 schools at the same time? Does it even matter anymore?
Yeah. I mean, I remember when Jacob Eason went into the portal in 2018. It was after the 2017 season. He started the first game, gets hurt. Jake Fromm comes in, takes Georgia to the national championship game. And I remember talking with his dad in mid-December when it was clear that Fromm was the starter. Jacob Eason was healthy, and he said, we're going to transfer. But if we lose in the Rose Bowl, it's going to make things easier. At that point, it was all of a done deal. He was going to Washington. But because Georgia beat Oklahoma in that Rose Bowl, and the national championship game was until January 14th, he had to enroll in classes on January, 7th or 8th. So he couldn't leave Georgia and enroll at Washington until the next fall. So he basically spent 6 months once he dropped out of Georgia, but couldn't do spring football because he had already started classes at Georgia. He couldn't transfer. Then you have the case of Malik Murphy a year ago. If you remember, Malik put his name in the portal and essentially said, with Texas going to the playoffs, I know that my team needs me. I was the backup to Quinn Ewers this year, but I've got to take care of myself. And he went to Duke. So you're going to have cases. And I think a better example is Dylan Morris. Dylan Morris was planning to go into the portal in November of last year, but as Washington kept winning, his loyalty was to the school he grew up loving. and he ended up going to James Madison, I think, for the spring quarter. Maybe it helped that, Washington was on a quarter system, but he was going to be the backup, and you saw him on the sidelines. Even though we knew that he was already in the portal in December, he was there celebrating with Michael Penix at the Sugar Bowl. He was there with him in the national championship game. It was like, listen, I can still get to that school eventually, but I'm with these guys till the end. So from an academic standpoint, it's basically I'm just making sure I get to those classes, or somebody's taking my online classes for me or setting up those online classes for me. I'm not here to play school, as Cardale Jones once said.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll keep my opinion to myself on that. Okay, let's talk about the schools out west. According to the rankings at 24/7, where you work, only one of the top 10 recruits from California and 3 of the top 15 stayed in the former, I'll call it Pac-12 footprint. Curious about the realignment impact on the West Coast. Curious about Oregon, SC, UCLA, Washington when it comes to California, how those teams netted out from the high school perspective about a week ago on signing day.
Yeah, I mean, Oregon has been a national brand. If you go back to when Joey Harrington's poster was in Times Square, they've been a national brand. They've gotten number one players from Southern schools, from Eastern states, from Midwest states regularly over the last probably 5 to 7 years, kind of coinciding with when Mario Cristobal took over and really going to another level with Dan Lanning. Alabama has 4 players in the top 15 from California. Texas A&M has 3 players from California in the top 15. Penn State has 2 players from the state of California in the top 15. That's 9 players. USC has 2. Okay, we understand Alabama because they're Alabama. They've been the standard bearer for the last 15 years. Kalen DeBoer has those West Coast ties. You kind of understand A&M. They've been kind of a hot name these last couple of years. Penn State's kind of the weird one, but one of those is LeVar Arrington Jr., so it kind of makes sense. The bigger issue is USC has 2. It has nothing to do with Alabama having 4 or A&M having 3. It's how has USC scuffled so much to recruit the in-state talent? And part of it's been Lincoln Riley's ties have been to Texas. They've been to the Southeast. So he's put a lot of time and effort in that region, gets commitments from those guys early. Well, then those guys at the end of the day realize, you know what? I want to stay in the South. Georgia sees that kid was committed to USC in February or March. Now we know what his market value is going to be. Now we know how much harder we have to recruit him. By the time USC pivots to the local kid who they now need to backfill that spot, I'm going to Oregon. Man, they've been on me since the beginning. I'm going to Washington. Washington did a great job in California this year. Brendan Carroll got 4 players from the West Catholic Athletic League, which is, in my opinion, the best league in Northern California. We all know about the Trinity League with Mater Dei and Bosco, but the West Catholic Athletic League with St. Ignatius, he got a player from there. He flipped from Texas. From Valley Christian, got an offensive lineman from there. From Archbishop Reardon, got 3 players from there. So they did a great job. And when you're a school like Washington, you look at USC and UCLA scuffling to recruit Southern California or Northern California. You see the Cal's not having as much success in their backyard. So you go in there. And then the problem is with your USC, UCLA, by the time you pivot to those West Coast kids and those in-state kids, they've already built a relationship months before with those other schools. Whereas Oregon just walks in with the polo, not unlike what Pete Carroll used to do. We used to joke that Pete Carroll didn't recruit, he evaluated. If he wanted a kid, he was getting the kid. He just had to make sure that he evaluated that kid right and that guy would be a good fit. That's where Dan Lanning and Oregon is at right now. If they put their claws into a kid, they're winning, they're producing NFL players, everybody knows that they've got a very good NIL structure in place, but it's not just, I see this every time when a kid commits to Oregon, it's all about money. Well, for one thing, it's legal, but you don't think the first round picks that are now going to the NFL and being Pro Bowlers, the success that they've had under Dan Lanning plays into that at all? Yeah, it absolutely does. They're going to have a Heisman finalist for the 2nd straight year. They're the number 1 overall seed. They're the only unbeaten team left. So that's what's happening is Oregon is recruiting like a monster right now. They are the one that's cracking the ceiling with the Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State kind of triumvirate that has been dominating recruiting. Oregon is now about to have the number 1 class in the Big Ten for the 2nd straight year. But remember, those Pac-12 schools are going to scuffle going to the Big Ten, right? Well, here's Oregon saying, oh, that was easy to win the conference. We won it without losing. We just had the best recruiting class in 2 years. So Oregon is just on another level recruiting-wise. USC is going to have to address this philosophy at some point. But in this era where you can use the portal, is local recruiting as important? Or do you recruit those national guys and then you hope that local kid you wanted is miserable at his other schools. So when he decides to go into the portal, he does want to come back home. That's kind of where they're at weighing. UCLA, I think this year's an incomplete given how late in the process they started. They still end up with a top 35 class, complete difference from the Chip Kelly years. But schools like Oregon, schools like Washington, they've got a philosophy and it's working.
Yeah, that's really well said. Another thing that's always worked is the impact you have on people. I see your T-shirt, Avery Huffman. We all know about the DIPG Foundation that was founded after she tragically passed away and impacted so many of us, you most and your family most importantly. What has it been like for you to continue to see the impact that your daughter has had through the lens of sport and your craft to so many people, me and our entire audience included?
It's incredible because here we are 10 years almost since she was diagnosed. It's been almost 9 years since she passed away. And I'll still have guys that'll hashtag, Avery Strong when they send me a message. We have camps every year. There's 7-on-7 tournaments. And you win a trophy, you're going to hear a speech about Avery. And, it's one of those things where CJ Carr, who was an Elite 11 finalist 2 years ago, is now at Notre Dame. His brother Chad died of the same thing that Avery did. We got connected with his family, and I'll have kids that, like, my sister got diagnosed with cancer. Can I connect my parents with you? Not to talk about football recruiting, but just to talk about that. And so there's an empathy that comes from many of these players, and so it's been awesome that here we are 8-9 years later, and I'm still able to share her story, and I'm still you have these camps and I'll have college coaches say, hey, we were going to do our own camp that way, but we're going to come to the Avery Strong Showcase because we want to support your foundation. Well, what that's doing is now giving those kids an opportunity to essentially audition in front of coaches that they wouldn't have been able to audition before, all because these guys want to support our foundation. And now these kids are going to have their dreams realized as a result of that. And, somebody who's worked with high school age players for 20 plus years, I love that. I love that I get to share her story, but I love that guys get to pursue their dreams because she didn't get a chance to pursue her dreams. And that's the one thing I share. Don't waste your opportunities, guys. If you have the opportunity to fulfill your dream and play the sport you love for as long as possible, I know a kid that would have given anything to get out of that wheelchair and just run around. So pursue and hone in on those dreams and thrive in those dreams, because there are so many kids that didn't get that chance and now you have the chance. Don't waste it, which is why the portal a lot of times kind of bums me out, because, like, man, is this really the best decision that you're making? There's a lot of guys that are making good decisions, but then there's a lot that's like, this was such a dream to you. This was so important to you 4 years ago, and now you're not pursuing it or not doing it with the same vigor you did a few years ago. That bums me out. Go pursue those dreams and keep listening, and let me tell Avery's story to you to maybe inspire you to do the same.
Yeah, man, that's a beautiful sentiment, and I know her impact is still felt dramatically. And what's cool is that the players are still sharing stories and learning about her. Coaches, I think, will always do that because of their relationship with you and how much all of us in the media adore you and have gotten to know you over the years. But it's saying something when you continue to transcend the next generation and do it by sharing, powerful stories from your daughter. Thank you for coming on, man. You know how
Absolutely.
I feel about you. And we always do this at least once a year where we talk recruiting, talk football. But my favorite part is always hearing what the latest is with the Avery Strong Foundation. And thanks again for your time, man.
It's my favorite part to share too, Yoga, and I appreciate you every year giving me that opportunity to share about it, because I know I was telling you guys out there, I still got my life on a wall, or a life in a walk poster on my wall, and I walk out of my office every day on the door and I see people that had written bravery, Avery Strong on it, and it brings a smile to my face.
Beautiful. Well, you do that to us as well. Everybody will go ahead, if you're not already, follow Brandon Huffman for all things football and life. We love that about him, the intersection of both. Brandon, thanks for the time, brother. Lots of love. And make sure you get a little candy from Stanko's desk right there in the corner office.
You got it. Thanks, Yogs.